The day began like any other for the millionaire. The sky outside his glass office tower was clear, the city buzzing with cars and people below inside. His team was gathered for an important meeting, papers spread across the long, polished table. Everyone waited for his words because when he spoke, deals were made and fortunes were shaped. He entered the room with his usual confidence. His tailored suit fit perfectly, his shoes shined. His assistants trailed behind him carrying files and phones that never seemed to stop ringing. To the world he was untouchable, strong, successful, a man who had everything. The meeting began smoothly, his voice carried across the room. Calm and commanding, he explained strategies, corrected mistakes, and gave instructions. Every eye was fixed on him. His presence alone filled the room. But beneath his sharp gaze and steady voice, something was wrong. A faint pain had been building in his chest for days. At first he ignored it, convincing himself it was only stress or fatigue after all. What was a little discomfort to a man who controlled empires? He had faced challenges far greater. He brushed it aside, poured another cup of coffee, and kept going. But on this day, as the meeting stretched on, the pain grew sharper. His hand instinctively pressed against his chest. His breathing slowed. A bead of sweat rolled down his forehead. He tried to hide it, forcing a smile, continuing his talk. He didn't want anyone to see weakness, not even for a moment. Suddenly, in the middle of a sentence, his words faltered, his vision blurred. The room seemed to tilt. Gasps erupted as he staggered backward, clutching at the edge of the table. Papers scattered as his weight knocked over a glass of water. His assistants rushed forward, shouting his name. Then it happened. His body gave out. He collapsed to the floor with a heavy thud. The room exploded into chaos. Phones were grabbed, someone shouted, "Call an ambulance." Others bent down beside him, shaking him, begging him to wake up. His face had turned pale, his breathing shallow. In minutes, paramedics stormed in, wheeling him out as his staff and family followed in shock. The powerful man who had commanded every room he entered was now lying helpless on a stretcher, oxygen pressed to his face, his eyes barely open. His empire, his wealth, his power, all of it meant nothing in that moment. News spread quickly. Investors, friends, and rivals all heard the same shocking words. The millionaire had collapsed. The mansion that night was filled with fear and confusion. His family gathered in the hospital waiting room, whispering prayers, clutching each other's hands. Everyone wondered how a man so strong could fall so suddenly. The doctors worked urgently, running test after test, attaching wires to his chest, machines beeping in rhythm with his struggling heart. "We'll do everything we can," one doctor assured the family. "But we must act fast." When he finally opened his eyes, he was no longer in his office but in a hospital bed, his body weak, his voice faint. Around him stood specialists, their faces serious. They spoke in medical terms he barely understood. He had always been the man with answers, but now he was surrounded by people searching for them. The first diagnosis was uncertain. Some thought it was his heart, others suspected his lungs. Each doctor gave a different theory. More experts were called in, the best in the field, 20 of them in total. Each promised to find the cause. Each promised to save him, but the millionaire, lying weak under the white sheets, could only stare at the ceiling. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. He had built a world where money solved everything, but in that moment, he realized money could not buy him the one thing he needed most: answers. His family stood by his bedside, fear etched into their faces. His wife held his hand, whispering, "You'll be fine, they'll fix this. Just hold on." His children tried to smile, but their eyes glistened with tears. Behind them, staff members, including the loyal Maid, watched silently, her eyes sharper than the rest, noticing every detail, every movement. The collapse had shaken the world of a man who thought he could never fall, and as he drifted into uneasy sleep, machines buzzing around him, he had no idea that the 20 doctors summoned to save him would fail, and that salvation would come from the most unexpected eyes watching quietly in the background. The hospital became a fortress of urgency. Ambulances came and went, nurses rushed through the halls, and the millionaire's private suite was guarded like a palace. Word had spread that one of the country's richest men had collapsed, and no effort would be spared to save him. The family used every connection. Every resource. Calls were made across the city, across the nation within hours. The best specialists arrived one after another, 20 doctors in total, each with reputations that stretched far beyond the walls of the hospital. They were men and women with years of experience, authors of medical books, pioneers in surgery, experts who were used to being introduced as the best in their field. The corridor outside his room filled with white coats and serious faces. Their voices were low, professional, yet tinged with unease. They studied the millionaire's condition carefully, flipping through charts, scanning results, nodding gravely at the machines beside his bed. The first doctor suggested it could be a heart issue. His pulse is irregular, and with his age, it's likely. Another shook his head, pointing to the screens. No, this doesn't look like a typical heart attack. Look here. The signs are different. Maybe it's his lungs, a third interrupted. No, the symptoms don't match either. Perhaps an infection, something rare. We'll run further tests, and so the endless cycle began. Needles pierced his veins for blood samples. Tubes pressed against his chest for scans. Machines hummed and beeped as they searched for answers. The family waited outside, exhausted and anxious, clinging to every word that came through the door. Day turned into night and night into day. But the doctors still argued. Each one had a theory. None could agree. One recommended a strong medicine. Another countered that it was too risky. A third suggested surgery. A fourth rejected the idea completely. Inside his room, the millionaire lay weak, his once strong voice reduced to whispers. He stared at the ceiling, wondering how it was possible that 20 of the smartest people in the country could stand around him, yet not one could save him. His empire of wealth had built skyscrapers and industries, but now even 20 doctors couldn't give him back his strength. His wife sat by his side holding his hand, her face pale from sleepless nights. She asked each doctor, "Will he be all right? Please, just tell me the truth." But the truth was that they didn't know. Some offered polite reassurance. Others avoided her eyes. None wanted to admit defeat. Not in front of each other. Not in front of the man whose name carried power everywhere. As the days dragged on, the family's hope began to crack. The children whispered to each other in the corners of the waiting room, "Why can't they fix him? They're the best doctors, aren't they?" His business partners visited briefly, leaving with faces full of worry. The mansion back home felt lifeless without him. Servants walked quietly through the halls, their whispers filled with fear. The doctors, meanwhile, grew restless. Their pride was on the line, 20 of them, and not a single one had the answer. They ordered more tests, more scans, more medicine. Yet nothing worked. His condition worsened. His body grew thinner, his skin pale, his breathing shallow. They spoke in complicated language. But the truth was simple. They were lost. They circled the problem like hunters chasing shadows. But the real cause remained hidden. The poor maid, who had served the family for years, came quietly each morning to help. She carried food, adjusted the curtains, cleaned the room gently. She was not part of the medical discussions. No one asked her opinion to the doctors. She was invisible to the family. She was just a background figure, but she watched carefully. Her eyes noticed details no machine recorded. The way he reacted to certain meals, the small wince when certain things were near him, the patterns that repeated every day. The doctors missed it because they looked only at reports, numbers and screens. They were blinded by their own knowledge, too focused on complex explanations to see the simple truth. The millionaire lay there surrounded by experts, yet growing weaker by the hour. His wealth had brought 20 of the best minds to his side, but even together they could not save him. And outside the circle of prestige and power, the maid continued her quiet work unnoticed, yet carrying in her sharp eyes the clue that could change everything. The gathering of the doctors was meant to be the family's salvation, but instead it became a symbol of helplessness. Their polished shoes and expensive instruments filled the room. Yet the man they were trying to save slipped further away. The family began to lose faith, whispers of hopelessness creeping into the mansion and the hospital corridors alike. And just as despair was beginning to take over, the quietest voice in the household was preparing to notice what none of the 20 doctors could see. The hospital room had grown colder, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the silence that hung heavy in it. The machines beeped softly, marking every fragile second of the millionaire's life. His body lay still under the white sheets, his face pale, his lips dry. He was surrounded by 20 doctors, yet no one could bring him back to strength. The hospital room had grown colder, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the silence that hung heavy in it. The machines beeped softly, marking every fragile second of the millionaire's life. His body lay still under the white sheets, his face pale, his lips dry. He was surrounded by 20 doctors, yet no one could bring him back to strength. In the waiting area just outside, his family sat in restless agony. His wife, once always elegant and confident, now looked smaller, her face lined with exhaustion. She clutched a scarf in her lap, twisting it again and again in her trembling hands. Every time the door opened, she jumped, hoping for good news, only to see another doctor walking out with the same tight expression. His children, usually shielded from hardship by their father's wealth, were shaken. The eldest son paced the floor, his footsteps echoing through the hall. He spoke angrily to anyone who would listen. How can 20 doctors not know what's wrong? What are they being paid for? His younger sister sat in the corner, her hands pressed together, whispering prayers over and over. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She couldn't bear to see her father like that. Relatives gathered too, cousins, uncles, aunts, each with their own whispers. Some were truly worried. Others already murmured about inheritance, about business, about what might happen if he didn't recover. Wealth brought comfort, but it also brought vultures. And in that waiting room it showed the mansion, once a symbol of his power, now felt like an empty shell. The servants moved quietly through the halls. Their voices hushed, even the walls seemed to hold their breath. The laughter, the grand parties, the clinking of glasses, all of it was gone, replaced by the echo of fear. At night his wife returned home briefly, only to find herself unable to sleep in the massive bed without him. She sat by the window staring at the city lights, remembering the man who had always seemed larger than life. She thought about their first years together, how he had promised her security, how he had built this empire brick by brick. Now she faced the thought of losing him, and her chest tightened with terror. His son wandered the hallways of the mansion late at night, running his hand along the railings of the grand staircase. He thought about all the lessons his father had tried to teach him, about business, about life. He regretted not listening closely. He regretted every argument, every careless word. What would happen if his father never woke up to guide him again? Back in the hospital, the doctors grew more distant. They spoke in medical terms that blurred together. Tests, scans, theories, contradictions. The family couldn't follow anymore. They only knew one thing: nothing was working. One evening, when the doctors left the room after another failed attempt, the youngest daughter slipped inside quietly. She sat beside her father's bed, holding his hand. His skin was cold, his grip weak. "Papa," she whispered, tears falling onto the sheet. "Please don't leave us, you're strong. You always fix everything, please fix this too." Her words went unheard by the doctors, who were already discussing the next steps in the hallway, but they lingered in the room like a soft plea, a cry of love that no machine could measure. The family began to argue as the days dragged on. Some blamed the doctors, some blamed each other. His wife insisted they should fly him abroad, but the doctors refused, saying he was too weak to move. The son shouted that they weren't doing enough, while the daughter begged them all to stop fighting. Their despair grew into anger, confusion, helplessness. Through all of this, the maid remained silent. She moved quietly around the mansion, tidying rooms, preparing clothes. She brought food to the hospital, making sure the family ate, though they often ignored her. To them, she was invisible, just a servant in the background, but her eyes missed nothing. She saw the weight in the wife's shoulders, the shaking hands of the children, the hopeless stares of the relatives. She saw the cracks forming in a family that had always been held together by the strength of one man. Every night the family returned home in despair, collapsing into couches and chairs, whispering that maybe it was time to prepare for the worst. If 20 doctors can't save him, who can? They muttered. Their words filled the mansion like poison, slowly draining hope from its walls. The millionaire himself, lying weak in his bed, heard pieces of these conversations. His heart ached, not just from illness but from helplessness. He had always been the one to provide answers, to bring solutions. Now he was the one everyone was waiting on, and he could do nothing but breathe shallow breaths and close his eyes. The family's despair grew deeper with every passing hour. They had all the money in the world. They had 20 experts at their command, yet none of it was enough. And in the quiet spaces between their arguments and tears, the maid's sharp eyes kept noticing the small details, the ones no one else thought to look at. While the family drowned in fear and hopelessness, she was beginning to see the clue that would later change everything. The mansion, once full of music and laughter, was now drowned in silence. Every night the family returned from the hospital exhausted, their eyes swollen from crying, their voices hoarse from arguments and worry. But in the middle of this storm, one person moved quietly, almost invisible, watching everything with eyes sharper than anyone realized. The maid. She had served the household for many years. She cleaned the rooms, prepared meals, polished the silverware, and carried out small errands. Most of the time, no one paid her much attention. She was part of the background, a shadow in the corners of their grand life. But that didn't bother her. She had learned to see and listen more than she spoke. Her silence was her strength, and in her silence she noticed things others overlooked at the hospital. While the doctors rushed in and out of the suite carrying charts and papers, while the family sat in circles whispering about what might happen, she stood quietly in the corner, wiping the table, fixing the blanket on his bed, refilling the water jug. Nobody asked her opinion. Nobody thought her thoughts mattered. But as she worked, her eyes were always on him. She noticed the little things. When the doctors fed him certain foods, his face twitched slightly, a faint grimace he tried to hide. When certain flowers were brought into the room, his breathing grew heavier. She watched the way he coughed more when particular perfumes filled the air. She saw the slight movements of his hands, the flicker in his eyes, the discomfort that seemed to come and go depending on what surrounded him. The doctors, with all their machines, saw numbers and graphs. They spoke in complicated terms, pointing to screens and papers. But she saw the man, his body's subtle reactions, his patterns, the details no report could capture. At night, when the family returned to the mansion in despair, she continued her duties. She passed through the empty halls, turning off lights, checking the kitchen. In those quiet hours, she thought deeply about what she had seen. She had no medical degree, no title, but her instincts told her that the answer was hidden in plain sight. She remembered how once, years ago, her own younger brother had fallen sick. The doctors in her poor neighborhood couldn't find the cause, but she had noticed it, something simple, something small, an allergy to food he ate daily. She had removed it, and slowly he recovered. That memory came back to her now, whispering to her that sometimes the truth was not in the complicated, but in the simple. At the hospital, she watched how the 20 doctors moved around like generals, each proud of their knowledge, each unwilling to admit defeat. Their voices filled the room. Overlapping theories, they argued. They scribbled notes, they ordered new tests, but none of them truly looked at the man as closely as she did. They treated him as a case, not a person. The millionaire's family, blinded by fear, never noticed her quiet observations. To them, she was just the maid bringing fresh towels and cleaning up after the visitors left. They didn't realize that she was studying the room more carefully than the doctors themselves. One evening, as she adjusted the blanket around his shoulders, she noticed again the slight wince in his eyes. She looked around the room. Her gaze landed on a tray of food left by the nurses, and her heart skipped. She had seen this reaction before. It wasn't random, it was connected. Her fingers trembled as she cleared the tray, her mind racing. She wanted to speak, to shout what she was beginning to suspect, but her courage wavered. Would anyone believe her? What weight did her words carry compared to 20 doctors? She was just a maid, a servant in a wealthy man's home. Her voice was small, but her eyes told her something important, something that could not be ignored much longer. Every day she returned, her observations growing sharper. She began to test silently, opening windows at certain times, removing flowers, adjusting what food was left near him, and each time she noticed his reactions change. When the flowers were gone, his breathing eased. When a certain food wasn't served, his coughing slowed. Her suspicions were becoming clearer. The family saw only despair, the doctors saw only confusion, but she saw a pattern. The truth was there, waiting to be spoken. Still, she held her silence a little longer, waiting for the moment she would be brave enough to step forward. For now she remained the unseen observer, the invisible figure in the corner who noticed what 20 doctors had missed. And as his life hung between hope and despair, the answer lay not in the machines or medicines, but in the eyes of the one person no one thought to ask. The days dragged on, and the millionaire's health only seemed to get worse. His body had grown weaker, his skin pale, his voice almost gone. The family sat in despair, the doctors argued in circles, but in the middle of all this, the maid's sharp eyes continued to follow every little detail. She wasn't trained in medicine, but she knew people, she knew how they reacted, how the smallest changes mattered. She had raised younger siblings, taken care of elders, watched illness and recovery in her poor neighborhood. She understood things not from textbooks but from experience and instinct. One evening, she entered the hospital room quietly, carrying a tray with fresh towels and water. The doctors had just left after another round of debates, leaving the family even more confused. The room smelled of medicines and flowers that had been placed by well-wishers. The millionaire lay motionless, his breathing uneven as she placed the tray down. She noticed something again. His face twitched slightly when the flowers were near him. His chest rose sharply. As if it became harder to breathe, she frowned. Gently moving the vase further away, slowly his breathing eased. Her heart raced. It was small, almost invisible, but she had seen it too many times now to ignore. She thought back to earlier moments, the faint grimace when certain meals were served, the coughing when perfumes lingered in the room, the sudden weakness after specific drinks. She began to piece it together in her mind like a puzzle. What if it wasn't a rare disease at all? What if it wasn't his heart or lungs in the way the doctors thought? What if it was something simpler, something he was constantly being exposed to? That night, when the family left the hospital exhausted, she stayed a little longer, pretending to fix the room. In truth, she was testing her suspicion. She removed the flowers entirely, opened the window for fresh air, and waited. His breathing calmed, his body seemed less restless. Her hands trembled as she wiped the table. She whispered to herself, "It's not sickness. It's something around him." The next day, the same thing happened. A nurse brought in food, rich and heavy. The moment it touched his lips, his face tensed, his skin flushed faintly. He coughed harshly, struggling to breathe. The doctors rushed in, writing down notes, prescribing more tests, but she saw it clearly. It was the food, not the illness itself. She stood in the corner, her heart pounding. Should she say something? Would anyone even listen? She had been invisible for so long that her words carried no weight. The doctors dismissed her with a single look. The family barely noticed her presence, but the clues were stacking in her mind. Each reaction matched, each detail fit. It was not 20 complicated theories fighting for space. It was one simple truth waiting to be spoken. That evening, as she returned to the mansion to fetch clothes for the family, she searched the kitchen quietly. She opened the cupboards, sniffed the containers. Her memory racing back to the hospital scenes. There it was, something small, something hidden in the ingredients of the meals being sent daily. A spice, a preservative, maybe even a simple allergy. The doctors had overlooked it because they were too busy chasing big explanations. Her chest tightened with both fear and excitement. She had found a clue, a thread that could unravel the entire mystery. But should she speak? The thought terrified her. If she was wrong, she would be laughed at, thrown out, maybe even punished for interfering. And yet, if she was right, she could save him. That night, she hardly slept. She sat on the edge of her bed in the servants' quarters, staring at the floor. Her mind replayed every detail. His face tightening near the flowers, his coughs after certain foods, the relief when the air was clean. She whispered to herself again, firmer this time. It's not the sickness, it's what he's being given. The next morning, she returned to the hospital with determination. Her heart still trembled with fear, but her eyes were steady. She couldn't stay silent any longer. The doctors had missed it. The family had lost hope. It was time for her to step forward, even if it cost her everything. The small clue was no longer just in her mind. It was a truth she was ready to voice. And in that moment, the quiet maid, the invisible figure in the background, was about to change the course of everything. The morning sun streamed through the tall hospital windows. But inside the millionaire's room, the air was heavy with despair. Machines beeped. Nurses moved quietly, and the 20 doctors stood in another tense circle, arguing again about theories that seemed to lead nowhere. His family sat nearby, drained and restless. The eldest son's face was red with frustration. "It's been weeks," he shouted. "You're supposed to be the best. How can none of you fix him?" His sister buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. The wife sat rigid, her eyes hollow, whispering, "Please, please save him." The maid entered softly, carrying a fresh tray of water and fruit. No one looked at her. She was just part of the background, as always. A shadow slipping in and out, but her heart pounded in her chest. Today she had promised herself she would speak. She placed the tray down and turned toward the doctors. Her voice shook at first, small and uncertain. "Excuse me," she said. The doctors barely turned. Some frowned as if she had interrupted something important. I think I've noticed something, the eldest son snapped. Not now. We don't need distractions, but she didn't step back this time. She clasped her trembling hands together, her voice growing firmer. Please listen to me. I've been watching him every day. I've seen things that don't match what you're saying. The room grew tense. The wife looked up, surprised. One of the doctors sighed impatiently. You are a maid, he said flatly. This is not your place. Leave this to professionals. Her cheeks burned. But she didn't back down. Maybe I am just a maid, but I am with him all the time. I see his reactions when no one else is watching. She pointed softly toward the bed. When the flowers are near him, his breathing grows worse. When certain foods are served, his face tightens. He coughs after certain drinks. I've seen it happen again and again. A murmur ran through the family. The daughter lifted her head, her teary eyes curious. What are you saying? She asked. The maid took a shaky breath. I think it's not a disease that no one can explain. I think it's something simple, something he's being exposed to every day. Maybe food, maybe flowers, maybe both. It's not inside his body. It's around him. The doctors exchanged glances. Some smirked, others rolled their eyes. One scoffed, This is nonsense. Do you really expect us to believe 20 trained specialists missed something a maid discovered? The son folded his arms, shaking his head. This is ridiculous. Throw her out. She's wasting our time, but the wife didn't speak. She studied the maid's face. There was no arrogance in her eyes, no agenda, only raw honesty and desperation. She had seen her loyalty for years. She had seen her care quietly without complaint. Could it be possible? The maid's voice rose, filled with a strength she didn't know she had. I don't care if you believe me or not, but I cannot stay silent anymore. If I am wrong, then throw me out, but if I am right, you will save his life. The daughter stood up suddenly. Let her speak, she said firmly. Her voice cracked, but her eyes were steady. We've listened to all of you for weeks, and nothing has worked. What harm is there in listening to her? The doctors fell silent, their pride bruised. But none dared argue with the family now. The wife turned to the maid. Tell me exactly what you saw. The maid's hands shook as she explained. Her words came quickly now, filled with passion. The night before last, when the flowers were removed, his breathing calmed. Yesterday, when a certain dish was served, his face tightened. He only grew weaker after meals with the same ingredient. I've noticed the pattern. It repeats. Please just check it. The wife leaned back. Stunned, the son looked unsettled, unsure whether to argue again or accept. The daughter, however, wiped her tears and whispered, She's right, I've seen some of it too. I just didn't realize. The doctors were forced into silence. Their pride told them to dismiss her, but deep inside, some of them knew she might have a point. One finally muttered, An allergy. It could explain some of the symptoms. Another added reluctantly, Food intolerance can mimic more serious illnesses. We may have overlooked it. The millionaire stirred faintly on the bed, his weak body responding as though his spirit could hear the argument around him. The maid stepped closer, her voice steady now. I don't need credit. I don't want reward. I just want him to live. Please test what I've said. You'll see I'm right. The wife's eyes filled with tears. She reached out and took the maid's hand. Something she had never done before. If you are right, you may be the only one who can save him. The hall fell into a deep silence. The proud circle of 20 doctors had been pierced by the words of the one person they had ignored. And though they resisted, they knew they had no choice now but to test her claim. The maid had spoken up, breaking the barrier of invisibility that had surrounded her for years, and in doing so, she had set into motion the revelation that would soon change everything. The room was tense after the maid's bold words. The 20 doctors, once confident and unshakable, now looked unsettled. Their pride had been wounded, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Could she be right? Could something so simple have been overlooked by all of them? The wife straightened in her chair, her voice trembling but firm. Test what she said, she ordered. The eldest son opened his mouth to argue, but her sharp glance silenced him. We have listened to theories for weeks, she added. Now we will test her observation. Reluctantly, one of the senior doctors cleared his throat. Fine. We'll conduct a controlled check. If she is wrong, this distraction ends here. He gestured to the nurses, who quickly began preparing. The maid stood quietly near the wall, Her hands clasped, her heart pounding. She knew this was the moment. Either she would be proven right, or she would be cast out as a foolish servant who dared to interfere. The test began. They removed the flowers from the room first. Within an hour, the millionaire's breathing eased. His chest no longer rose and fell with such painful effort. The monitors showed steadier lines. The family leaned forward, whispering in disbelief, "Look, he's calmer." The doctors frowned, shifting uncomfortably. One muttered, "It could be coincidence." Next, they tested the food. The kitchen staff prepared 2 trays, one with the usual rich dish, one without the suspected ingredient. The maid stood silently, her eyes fixed on the bed. She already knew what would happen. When the spoon with the old dish touched his lips, within minutes his face tightened, his skin flushed faintly, and his cough returned. The machines beeped faster. The family gasped. The doctors hurried forward, scribbling notes, murmuring to each other. Then, when the safer tray was tried, his body relaxed again. The coughing stopped. His breathing grew smoother. His eyelids fluttered open slightly, and for the first time in days, a faint strength seemed to return to him. The wife pressed her hands to her mouth, tears filling her eyes. The daughter cried openly, "It's true. She was right." The son, once so dismissive, stood frozen, his face pale with shame. The senior doctor removed his glasses, his voice heavy. "It appears she is correct. It is not an untreatable disease. It is a severe allergic reaction, triggered by what he was eating and what surrounded him." Gasps rippled through the family. "All this time," the wife whispered, "and none of you saw it?" The doctors exchanged embarrassed glances. Their pride was shattered. They had been chasing complicated answers, blinded by their own expertise, and had overlooked the simple truth. The maid lowered her eyes, her hands trembling. She had no joy in proving them wrong, only relief that he might finally be saved. She whispered softly, "I only wanted him to live. That's all." The millionaire stirred again, his weak eyes opening slightly. He looked around the room, his gaze falling on his wife, then the doctors, then finally the maid. His lips moved slowly, and though his voice was faint, everyone in the room heard it. "She saved me." Tears poured down the wife's cheeks as she clasped his hand tightly. "Yes, she did," she whispered. She saw what no one else did. The doctors confirmed their findings, ordering all harmful items to be removed immediately. They adjusted his diet, changed the surroundings, and within days, his strength began to return. His breathing stabilized, his color came back, and his voice grew stronger. The family watched in awe, as the man they had nearly lost recovered, not because of 20 doctors, not because of wealth or machines, but because of the quiet observation of someone they had never truly valued. The mansion buzzed with the news. Servants whispered in amazement. It was the maid who saved him. Guests who visited shook their heads, stunned that 20 of the nation's best had missed what a humble woman had seen with her eyes. The wife called the maid into the room one evening, her voice trembling with gratitude. "We owe you everything. Without you, he would not be here. You are no longer just a maid in this house. You are family." The maid, overwhelmed, bowed her head. "I did only what I could, madam," she said quietly. But her heart swelled for the first time. She was not invisible for the first time. Her voice had been heard. The hidden truth had been revealed. The millionaire was alive not because of the 20 experts who carried titles and fame, but because of the one person no one expected, the woman who had always stood in the background, watching, caring, noticing what others missed. And in that truth lay a lesson deeper than any medicine. Sometimes it is not the greatest minds that save a life, but the simplest heart that refuses to stay silent. The days that followed felt like a miracle. The millionaire's body, once frail and fading, began to regain its strength. His breathing grew steady, his color returned, and the sharp pain that had tormented him slowly disappeared. For the first time in weeks, the family could sleep without fear, knowing he was not slipping away in the night. The 20 doctors, once proud and commanding, now kept their voices low when they visited. They had been humbled. Their faces carried the weight of embarrassment. They spoke politely, careful not to mention how they had missed what a maid had seen with her eyes. The truth had bruised their pride, but it had also opened their minds. Some even whispered among themselves that they would never again underestimate the simplest clues. The family, too, was transformed. The wife who once barely noticed the maid's presence now sought her out. She held her hands warmly, tears in her eyes. "You saved him. "You saved us all," she said one evening. Her voice broke. "I cannot imagine our lives without you from this day. You will never be invisible again in this house." The daughter embraced her as well, whispering, "I thought God had stopped listening to me. But he was listening through you." The son, who had once scoffed and tried to silence her, lowered his head in shame. He could barely meet her eyes. "I was wrong," he admitted quietly. "Forgive me. You are braver than all of us." The maid stood quietly, her eyes shining with humility. She had never asked for praise, never dreamed of recognition. She had only wanted to do the right thing. "I only spoke because I couldn't bear to stay silent," she said softly. "I could not watch him suffer when I knew there was something wrong." When the millionaire was finally strong enough to sit up in bed, he called for her. The family and doctors stood around, but he waved them aside. His voice was still weak, but his words carried power. "Come closer," he said to her. She stepped forward timidly, her hands clasped nervously. He looked into her eyes that had seen the truth when everyone else was blind. "I owe you my life," he whispered. "Not the doctors, not the wealth, not the machines. You noticed what no one else did. You spoke when it could have cost you everything. You saved me." Tears welled in her eyes. She bowed her head. "I only did what I had to, sir." But he shook his head gently. "No," he said. "You did what others would not. You had the courage to stand when everyone ignored you. That is greater than anything money can buy." He turned to his family, his voice growing stronger. "From this day forward, she is not just a maid in this house, she is part of this family. And her voice will always be heard." The wife and children nodded, their faces solemn but filled with respect. The room was filled with a different kind of silence now. Not despair, but reverence. When he returned home to the mansion weeks later, the house was filled with celebration, but it was not the kind of celebration that came from wealth or grandeur. It was simple, heartfelt. The servants smiled and clapped, the family hugged him, and in the center of it all stood the maid, her presence no longer overlooked. He walked slowly through the halls he had once taken for granted. Every step was a reminder of the second chance he had been given. He stopped by a window, looking out at the city he had ruled with his business, and whispered to himself, "All my life I thought money could buy everything, but it could not buy the eyes that saved me, or the courage that spoke the truth." That night, he gathered everyone, family, relatives, even the servants, and spoke openly. His words were not about business deals or power, but about gratitude. "I was nearly taken from this world," he said, "while surrounded by 20 of the best doctors. Yet the one who saved me was the person none of us listened to, the one we overlooked, the one we treated as invisible. Let this be a lesson to all of us. Never underestimate a voice, no matter where it comes from. Wisdom is not bound to status, and truth can live in the humblest heart." The room erupted in quiet applause. Some wept, some smiled, everyone felt the weight of his words. The maid stood at the back, her eyes glistening. For years she had worked in silence, ignored, unseen, and now she was the reason the master of the house was alive. She felt no pride, only peace. She had done what she was meant to do. From that day forward, the mansion changed. The family no longer overlooked her. The children sought her advice. The wife treated her with respect, and the millionaire himself often said, "If you want honesty, listen to her. She sees more than any of us." Her courage had not only saved a life, it had changed hearts. It had reminded them all that value is not measured in wealth or titles, but in truth, compassion, and courage. And so the story ended not with the triumph of 20 doctors nor the power of money, but with the voice of a humble maid who dared to speak when no one else would. The millionaire lived, but more than that, he learned, and his family carried that lesson forever.